on the last portion of this part 1 of chapter 3, let's go do half of the barriers of listening overview. And so we'll only do these 2 over here, and we'll continue on next class. So the first 2 we are going to talk about is external barriers to listening and also listener barriers. The others we will go over in the next class are speaker barriers and cultural barriers. Okay, so we're really just doing these first 2. And let's go ahead and do that. So the first one, external barriers. So what are some examples of external barriers that will affect listening? Well, we have talked about noise before, and it could be any sound or anything that interrupts a message, okay? And that was based on chapter 1 and chapter 2. There could be some other stimuli as well. Maybe this is just an example that I'm thinking in my head. Maybe someone waving a hand at you behind the speaker's back. And it's throwing you off, okay? So it's throwing you off. Something is happening behind that speaker, and you're having a hard time listening just because there's other stimuli. There's also something called information overload, okay? So maybe, as an example, you are taking Algebra 1 or AP Calculus, whoever your teacher is, I don't know who he is, okay? And your teacher is giving way too much information. And it happens, you know. Step 1, step 2, step 3. This is how you solve for x. You got to multiply 2 on both sides. This. This is how you take a limit. You got to do this, and this. And sometimes it's way too much. Okay. So those are some external barriers to listening: noise, other stimuli, and information overload. Last for this video are listener barriers, or listener barriers on the listener's end. Hey, you know what? It happens. Boredom. Okay. Topic doesn't interest you at all. Laziness. And what I mean by laziness is, especially when we're in a routine, when you know what's going to happen, you know what they're going to say. So for example, when you go to class, sometimes teachers like me tend to get really repetitive. Like I would say, hey, good morning, class. You know, most teachers will go in a routine of things to say. Meaning that when you go to, most teachers' classroom, they'll have a routine things to say. They'll probably say, they'll greet you, good morning, good afternoon. Let's go over, are there any problems with the last night's homework? Okay, or maybe there's a bell ringer that starts off the class, or maybe there's something else, so you have that routine. And sometimes with routine, it just gets, and all these topics can overlap. I mean, since you already know what's going to go on, you're probably going to tune out because you know the words that they're going to say. And I said also same thing for going to restaurants. They'll welcome you. Hi, welcome. Today our special is going to be, and then you probably tune out sometimes because maybe even though the special might be different, and specials might be different, they have a script that they're usually following. Okay, waiting to speak. Some people often plan what they'll say when it's their turn to speak. And I think I saw a meme like that. Some people are not really listening. I mean, they're just waiting so that they can reply back to someone, Okay, last 3, opinionatedness. So also known as strong attitudes. So also known as, we're going to abbreviate that as AKA, strong attitudes. And you're listening. And I'll give you an example when we have this homework number 2. Okay, prejudice. Some people whose minds are closed to new ideas often aren't willing to listen. So they may block out things that do not match. If there's some things that don't match their beliefs and they hear it, they'll probably just block it out or ignore it. sometimes the lack of interest will go hand in hand with boredom. But I think more specifically, the lack of interest of to the speaker. And one way you could do that, well, for U.S. culture anyway, American culture, is you may not make eye contact. Okay. I do want to make a couple. So like I said before at the very beginning, I do want to make a couple of things when a book or a teacher or something gives you like kind of like advice on how to speak better or how to do things better. And all this stuff is good, but you know, it may not be 100% effective in every single scenario, especially, you know, you just got to be careful, especially when the scenario calls for people, maybe you're in a dangerous situation, okay, and then by then I don't think you'll be wanting to listen. I mean, your listening might be depending on really the situation that you're in. Okay, so just be careful. I'm not saying take it as a grain of salt, but with all of these barriers that I'm telling you guys from the book and why people don't listen, it's good information, but it really just depends on the context and the situations that you guys are in. Okay, so just be careful with that. I'm going to end with, so homework problem number 2. We're done already with the notes. Check to make sure all the notes are taken from the video, which is this video and last video. I want to go over homework problem number 3. So the goal of this activity is to identify listener barriers in yourself. So I did one for myself so you guys can see the example. List at least 2 examples of the situations in which you are affected by listener barriers. Find examples from home, school, work, and social situations we may share and discuss with the class. How would you try to improve the situations you describe if possible? So take a look at my template, Mr. Lucas example number 1. Well, my own example. So I sometimes tune out when we have teacher meetings, and that's true. This is not a fake example. This is a true example. A good amount of time, these teacher meetings tend to be 2 hours long, longer than any of our class periods. So here are my listening barriers, and the listening barriers I got was from the barriers that we've listed over here. Okay. It's a truly mix of information overload, boredom, and opinionatedness, especially during HB-Con-C. Why I said information overload is because the presenter would just present 50 slides worth of information, and honestly, for me as a human being, it is too much to process everything at a 2-hour meeting. The information also is not the most exciting. I know it's important and it's selfish of me to say, but sometimes I just can't relate to it. I'm trying to relate to all of the pieces of information because I know that these topics can relate to someone else. At the same time though, I do have my opinions on these certain topics. If I feel like it will not enhance my teaching practices, I tune out. Okay, so I know, so this is some, you know, sort of deep feelings over here, but then, yes, you'll have your moments of, you know, your listening barriers and your complaints and stuff like that. But the final question is, you know, how would you try to improve your situation you described if possible? So for me, I said, it's my 10th year teaching, and it's getting harder to receive more information about teaching when you kind of have something set that works for you in your classroom. But with these technological and health changes and issues, I have to try to be more open. And I have been, especially with, you know, trying to incorporate Google Classroom and a lot of other things that I'm not used to yet. Maybe at the next meeting, which will be next week for me, instead of just looking at the slides, I could actually maybe jot down keywords with my pen and paper. So I do carry on a composition book and jot down those keywords ideas that I can relate to. Okay, so that's a template that you guys can use for that one. And I think these are, 3 points apiece? Yeah, so your example number 1, your situation, listening barriers, and how you would try to improve. And situation number 2, listening barriers, and how you would try to improve. All right, that is it for part 1 of listening.